Most of us don't spend much time thinking about fish. They exist somewhere beneath the surface of the water, distant and easy to overlook, unless they're on our plates. Biologist and writer Jonathan Balcombe invites readers to consider a surprising question. What might the inner life of a fish actually be like? The excerpt I'll be reading follows a nameless man in the moments throughout his life when he slowly begins to see fish not as objects in the water, but living creatures capable of feeling. I'll admit, of all the topics someone could become fascinated by, fish empathy is probably not the most common one. It's a slightly niche and awkward interest to explain to people. But what makes this book unexpected, though, is not only the idea that we might empathize with a fish, it also turns into a deeper reflection of something more human, why we feel empathy for some creatures and struggle to extend it to others. His book approaches ecology from a more unique, almost philosophical angle, something I appreciate as someone who's always felt strung between the worlds of STEM and the humanities. Through the narrator's observations and lived experiences, this subject felt far more alive to me than any diagram in a textbook ever had. So, this is What a Fish Knows by Jonathan Balcombe. When I was 8, I climbed into an aluminum rowboat with the elderly director of a summer camp north of Toronto. He rowed a quarter-mile out into the shallow bay, and we spent the next 2 hours fishing. It was a calm summer evening, and the water was like glass. It was my first time in a small boat, and floating on this vast, faintly undulating expanse of dark water was exhilarating. I wondered what creatures lurked below, and this stoked my excitement whenever the sudden jerk of my primitive fishing pole, a stripped sapling with a line and a hook, signaled that a fish had struck the bait. I caught 16 fish that day. Some we released, several others larger bass and perch, we kept for breakfast the next morning. Mr. Nelson did all the dirty work, baiting the barbed hooks with writhing earthworms, twisting the wire out of the fish lips, plunging his knives into their skulls to kill them. His face contorted strangely as he performed these tasks, and I wondered if he was feeling revulsion or if he was merely lost in concentration. I have some fond memories of that experience, but as a sensitive boy with a soft spot for animals, I was disturbed by a lot of what went on in that rowboat. I worried privately about the worms. I fretted that the fish felt pain as a stubborn hook was extracted from their bony, staring faces. Maybe one of the keepers survived the knife and was dying slowly in the wire basket dangling over the side. But the kind man sitting at the boat didn't seem to think there was anything wrong. So I rationalized that it must be okay. And the taste of fresh fish at the next morning's breakfast left only vague remnants of misgivings from the previous evening. That was not my only childhood encounter with fish that raised conflicting emotions about our cold-blooded cousin's place in our moral calculus. In fourth grade, I was one of a few kids recruited to move some supplies from our classroom to a neighboring room at my elementary school in Toronto. Among these items was a glass fishbowl containing a lone goldfish. The vessel was 3/4 full of water and quite heavy. Concerned that the fish not be placed in the hands of someone who might care less than I did, I volunteered to transport the bowl to its destination, a counter next to the sink in the adjoining room. How ironic. I firmly held the bowl in my child's hands and methodically walked out the door, down the hall, and into the new room. As I gingerly approached the counter, the bowl slipped from my grasp and smashed on the hard floor. It was a moment of horror that played out in slow motion. Shards of glass splintered and water sloshed across the floor. I stood there, stunned. Someone with more wits than I grabbed a mop and moved the glass and water to one side. Then the four of us began to scour the floor for the fish. A minute went by with no sign of the creature. It was like a bad dream. It seemed as if she had experienced goldfish rapture and had risen up to the fishy heavens. Finally, someone found her. She had bounced behind a radiator and ended up on the inside lip, 2 inches above the floor and completely out of view. She was still alive, gawping meekly. She was quickly plopped into a beaker of tap water, and I believe that fish survived. Though the goldfish incident left a deep impression in me, as evidenced by my vivid recollection of it 4 decades later, I was not moved to a new empathy for fish. Admittedly, I never took a shine to fishing. What little enthusiasm remained after that outing with Mr. Nelson soon faded when it came time to bait and extract my own hooks. But I made no connection between the perch and bass I unceremoniously hauled up from Sturgeon Bay, or the hapless little goldfish I dropped at Edithville Elementary School, and the anonymous fish who ended up in the filet-o-fish sandwiches I enjoyed on family trips to the local McDonald's. That was the late 60s, and already McDonald's was boasting over 1 billion served. They could have as soon been referring to fish or chickens as the customers. But like other members of my culture, I was blissfully removed from the once living, breathing creatures who ended up in my lunch. It was not until I took an ethology course in the final year of my undergraduate biology degree, 12 years later, that I began to seriously question my relationship to animals, including fish. I was as captivated by fish's diverse anatomy and adaptations as I was disturbed by the parade of inert, once living bodies we were given to classify using dissecting microscopes and taxonomic keys. The class made a midterm visit to the Royal Ontario Museum, where we met one of Canada's foremost ichthyologists for a private tour of the museum's fish collection. At one point, he unlocked and raised the lid of a large wooden case to reveal an enormous lake trout floating in an oily preservative. The fish, weighing a record 103 pounds, had been caught at Lake Athabasca in 1962. Her size and plumpness were attributed to a hormone imbalance that had rendered her sterile. Energy that would have normally been spent on the profligate task of egg production was instead assigned to body mass. I felt for that fish. Like most we encounter, she had no name and her life was a mystery. I felt she deserved a more dignified existence than entombment in a wooden case. To me, it would have been better had she been eaten, her tissues recycling back into the food chain, than to float for decades in darkness, polluted by chemicals. Legions of books have been written about fish, their diversity, their ecology, their fecundity, their survival strategies, and several bookshelves can be filled with books and magazines about how to catch fish. To date, however, no book has been written on behalf of fish. I'm not referring to the conservationist message that decries the plight of endangered species or the overexploitation of fish stocks. Regardless of which estimate or dizzying number you take, they tend to mask the fact that each fish is a unique individual, not just with a biology, but with a biography. Just as each sunfish, whale shark, manta ray, and leopard grouper has a distinctive pattern from which you can recognize individuals on the outside, each has a one-of-a-kind life on the inside, too. And therein lies the locus of change in human-fish relations. It is a fact of biology that every fish, like the proverbial grain of sand, is one of a kind. But unlike grains of sand, fishes are living beings. This is no trivial distinction. When we come to understand fishes as conscious individuals, we may cultivate a new relationship to them. Thank you for listening.